Red Lady of Paviland Cave. Now the first things first, it's not a red lady, it's a bloke. However, how much you all want to feel that you know something about the person at Paviland Cave, the one thing that you do know about the person at Paviland Cave is being taught to you by archaeologists and historians. And if you look one by one the facts that they offer you, most of them fall apart completely. When you do an exercise like this and you try and test it out in front of one group of people and another group of people, and the same things keep cropping up, and then you have another group of people and the same things cropping up, and you start to think, right, actually that's right and wrong. That's a good way of doing things. It's very difficult to give a lecture and read something and write it all down and agree with it, because people are going away with what you're saying rather than thinking. Next week we'll be looking at Lubyanka woman, somebody you've never heard about. And sooner or later we'll be looking at Otzi the Iceman and Richard III and all these people. And one by one you need to sort of look at the facts that I'm giving you and make up your own mind. One thing that we do know about this individual found in a cave at Paviland, the discovery was made under very strange circumstances. The reason why the discovery was made under very strange circumstances is that in 1822, I believe before, somebody entered that little cave there. We can see on the first illustration, Paviland Cave and the Ice Age Hunters. That little cave by there. Now, one thing that we can understand is wrong before the outset is every single reconstructed drawing concerning the Lady of Paviland Cave is completely and utterly wrong. And it starts off with that hole. And the reason why it starts off with that hole is that if we look here, this is apparently a group of people from 25,000 years ago, 28,000 years ago, 33,000 years ago, 34,000 years ago. In fact, we don't know when the body was placed in the cave at Paviland Cave. Science always gives us a different date. It always seems to date the individual buried at Paviland Cave 1,000 years older. When they first used carbon dating on this individual at Paviland Cave in the 1960s, it was originally dated to 18,000 years ago. In the 1990s, it's dated to 26,000 years ago, 28,000 years ago. 2007, 2008, it was dated to 33,000 years ago. So you can get an idea. It was a blooming long time ago, but there you go. The reason why this is completely wrong is because it shows the entrance to the mouth exactly the same today, and they're assuming that the entrance to the mouth was exactly the same in the past. And that is the first mistake. It's along the coast, for God's sake. And it's along a part of the coastline today, but it wasn't back in the time. That here is excessively being eroded. And it's been excessively eroded for some thousands of years. In between the body being placed into the cave, the water's gone up and down from hot periods to cold periods. And slowly or not, the sea is still rising. And naturally, it's a coastal location. It might be carboniferous limestone, but this is being eroded. Maybe a couple of millimetres every few years, but it's still being eroded. If you put those couple of millimetres over 1,000 years, then you start to get metres. If you put 10,000 years, and you find a few more metres of eroded. So the failure of the archaeologists is to say that what we feel is what we've got, and for you to not question it. You've got to question everything about the reconstruction drawings that they usually paint. Whenever you go to see the Lady of Paviland Cave shown in, for example, the National Museum of Wales, you always see an illustration like this. People clothed in clothing. I've seen that coat advertised in M&S. This is not the type of thing these would have been wearing. If you look at somebody like Otzi the Iceman from just over 5,000 years ago who've been wearing something very similar to that. Not this sort of type of clothing that you could pick up in a store today to try and keep you warm. And then the key to the inaccuracy of people's understanding of this individual at Paviland Cave is not just to do with the fact that the sex of the individual is completely wrong. It's in fact a man. How the person is buried. The person being buried here was buried in a completely different way than they're portrayed. And that, again, is another clue to completely forget everything the archaeologists are saying. Just look what the archaeological evidence tells you. So not get confused with what I'm saying here, just go with the facts, the very, very facts. We know the body was buried in a small hole in the ground, and the body was left exposed to the elements for hundreds, if not thousands of years. The bones themselves were stained with ochre, another fact. They also found ivory rods associated with the body. But unfortunately, the archaeologists tell you that the ivory rods were sort of found above the head area, right? In fact, when Reverend Buckland was excavating there, if that's what he found, the ivory rods were found on the chest. They also found some periwinkle shells around the groinal area in two little pockets in the excavation with holes in them. And then the archaeologists like to tell you that these were actually used as necklaces. How can they be necklaces when they're found here? So you need to look at these facts, you need to ask the questions. And with the lady at Paviland Cave, you need to look at the evidence and make up your own mind. Because what's being said has been categorically wrong. Oh, ask me about the ochre and the staining of the bones later, not yet. But
I was just about to ask you.
Me too. Continue excitement.
the staining of the bones, that's a really good one. That's a really nice one. A nice subtle one. And the reason why it's nice and subtle is to do with the putrefaction of the body and how the body decays. So let's forget about how the body's found. Let's just do that in a few moments. Let's look at the process of the actual archaeology itself. And we're going to keep this illustration here. Head here, feet, important. Rest of the body. And that's where we're going to begin. The staining on the bones could have only have been created if the body was left exposed, completely naked, in a naked state. And one thing that we can say is that for a body to break down, to deteriorate, is a long process if it's left in a cave which has very few things that are going to actually eat and gnaw away at the bones, as long as you keep them out. And there's a little clue there, we'll keep that for a second. The body itself was left exposed. It was placed in a hole in the ground, left exposed. One other point is this is one of the earliest burials that we find anywhere on the planet. If it's much older than it's one of the most oldest bodies ever found. Within that area as well, there's reference to Neanderthal bones or evidence or indications being found. All that stuff has been lost. That body itself, ochre was only added to the naked body when the body was starting to putrefy a little bit. Because the oils that are actually in your flesh and your muscles and all the rest of it, if you add ochre to it as your flesh is starting to decay, all that will act as a catalyst to stain your bones. You cannot stain bones if the bones are covered up in clothing. Because this is a cave, remember, cave temperature is between 11.5 and about 12 degrees C. It's the same all the time. Okay, if you can keep the wild animals out of there, which is key to this, and that's another key to something else, the body will naturally decay. And you can imagine, Dorothy, I want you to keep in your mind a minute, I want you to keep in your mind, where did these people live that buried this person? Just bring that to me in a short while, that'd be useful. as the body itself decays. So if you can't remember, let Bill remember that one, okay?
No, you sound like a spiritress. Okay.
Good. The body itself, we only have staining over this from here up to about here, right? We don't have the skull because it disappeared, along with a mammoth skull and a hyena skull. Reverend Buckland took it back to his office in Oxford. He put them on the desk, and the next day they disappeared. He claimed that they fell off his desk and they couldn't find them.
He took the skull.
Yes, he did.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh,
Anyway, go with the flow. So the body itself is decaying. We digress. The body itself is decaying. And every time you want to visit this person in the cave, you're going to add ochre to it. Ochre is one of those things that adds life. Throughout mythology, throughout the past, the colour red, for example, civilizations like the Aztec and the Maya saw red as life. They saw red as death, and they saw red as life. Ochre, the colourant itself, is really, really important. And what's happening, you're going to add ochre to it as the body decays. And when the body's actually down to the bone itself, it's naturally being stained. You can't add ochre to a body like this when the body's gone straight down to bone, because all the oils and stuff are gone, all the catalysts are gone, right? So you'd have had to have added the ochre to the body as it's decaying. That's a really important fact, which you're not told about. The other thing as well is it's not covered up either. There's no real covering on it, and that leads us to another problem. Coming to your point in a minute, Dorothy. If it's covered up in a cave, the leather itself is going to take a long time to decay. In fact, it could take thousands of years to decay. At which point, the people who knew this person have long since gone, and animals gone in the cave, snapped everything. It's been moved around. This body is articulated. It's not being gnawed at by animals. It's not being defleshed by people. Right? It's been laid out there, and eventually, after the ochre had stained the bones, they must have covered it up. These people must have covered up, which is really, really important. But in all that, the feet themselves were actually bound, because the bones in the feet are still there. They haven't moved around. Dorothy, ask me that question.
What do you want now, the ochre or where they lived?
Where they lived.
I think they're travelling and he died and they got to move on because they dressed for travelling.
Well, I'm saying that they didn't particularly dress like this, but they would have had more heavier clothes. And there's one point. Keep with that. I'm going to actually say no to the travelling bit. There's a reason for that. Keep with that. If you bury to create an item of clothing like this is a hell of a lot of work. You're not going to bury somebody with an item of clothing like this, right? Because it's a lot of work. You're going to need to keep that clothing yourself, right? Whatever temperature, right? Today is cold, right? You're not going around naked, right? So let's look logically. They would have had to create clothing. Basically, there's fresh seams on this, right? Which is not the type of clothing that they would have had 30,000 years ago. It would have been composite bits of material all added together. Forget this.
Right.
Think it differently.
He's naked on the floor.
Yeah, and think of these.
Covering,
Yes.
they're not dressed like that.
Think of these.
Where's the sea? Is it up, down?
You can't see the sea because it's a 50-metre long passageway.
Right.
Now this is key. You've actually introduced what I wanted to say. Dorothy, you're really good now. Basically, what's happened, as coastal erosion has eroded everything away, this body in the cave has got closer and closer to the sea as the seas come in. When this body was placed into the cave, it was 18 miles away from the sea, this location. The sea has come closer and closer and eroded this all away. Right? The Carboniferous. 80 miles. The sea was 18 miles away, yeah? Not the landscape hasn't been the landscape hasn't been eroded away, right? But the sea's coming because it was an open plain in front of this. Could you imagine a 50-metre long cave, right? In those 50-metre long caves, other animals would have lived, right? However, they know no other animals lived in this cave, because if they had, they'd have eaten away the flesh from this person. That's fact one. There was no wolves, there was no bears in this cave, right? The problem is, as humans would move away, animals would move into the cave and gnaw away at the flesh. There's no indication of this. They're all there. right? An animal's not going to go away with a bone, right, and then bring it back in the same locality. There would be teeth bones on it. It's being left there. It's very likely, 99% chance, unless there was something annihilating all the animals across the landscape, killing everything, right? People must have lived in the mouth of the cave. And they must have lived in the mouth of the cave for some time. They were semi-nomadic, but not completely nomadic. We know, for example, one sec, Dorothy, we know, for example, that this person ate a lot of fish, and the sea's some distance away. So they would have to have travelled, and that would have gone into their system, in their bone system. This person had a 20% diet of fish. Dorothy.
No, where he's buried is totally wrong if they live there. I always thought that you would be at the back of the cave to be...
This was the back of the cave once.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
And I thought that if they're living in the front of it, that, as I say, but we're not supposed to concentrate on that.
No, you are right. Everything you're saying is right. So in other words, this is at the back of the cave back then. 50 metres out here, right, was where they lived. And they had to have lived, this is fact, they would have had to have lived in the mouth of the cave, because that stopped animals going in there and eating away at the flesh. That's another fact.
I'm confused.
Go for it.
They're 80 miles away from the sea,
Yeah.
yet he's got periwinkle shells with him,
Yeah.
and he's eating fish.
Yes. And here's another fact. This means that he's semi-nomadic. The people are semi-nomadic. They lived in the mouth of that cave for some time, but when this person died, this person had travelled to have eaten that fish in the first place. But there's another fact here, okay? This is going to blow your mind. This is going to blow your mind. So, say a nice egg box. This is really useful, actually. Nice egg box. This is Carboniferous rock. Yeah, this is Carboniferous rock. And that's the Carboniferous rock. That's formed underneath the sea. Carboniferous rock was formed underneath the sea. It's great, excellent, right? That was 350 million years ago. Around 250 million years ago, this rock was pushed up out of the sea to create the mountain ranges of South Wales. South Wales had mountain ranges taller than Mount Snowdon at one stage. It's a huge Carboniferous mountain range, right? And slowly but surely, over 50 million years, that landscape got eroded away. Okay, the Carboniferous stone got eroded away. And loads of little caves started to form. And in those caves, sandstone started to go into those caves, get blown into those caves. And because what happened 200 million years ago, the landscape of South Wales was actually a huge lake. But as the lake muds and the sandstones build up, all these caves and stuff get clogged up with all the mud and sandstone. And eventually, that forms into rock. That goes back under the sea and then brought back up again. So what happens, you have Carboniferous stone 350 million years old, and what you have then is forming inside all those holes and stuff for the Carboniferous mountain range, all this sandstone, right? All this Triassic sandstone, this red sandstone, the mud sandstone. This is where the ochre comes in. Really interesting point. So you're thinking, hang on a minute. From an archaeological point of view, where did they get the ochre and mudstone from? They must have got it from the eroded landscape around them, because the sea is eroding this soft sandstone and mudstone away to create pebbles, which they can grind down about 2 bucket loads of ochre to actually use to spread above the body. Just a little geological timetable explains the ochre. Now there's no sandstone there at all, because it's all been eroded away by the sea. And there is one other strange thing about this cave, right? There's one really weird thing about this cave, is at one point it would have been full of sandstone and mudstones and all the rest of it. That's been all eroded away by one ice age. This cave has got another ice age to come. And weirdly enough, the body survives in this cave.
That seems strange, doesn't it?
Because I don't believe that the body was ever found here in the first place.
Well, why is there only one body?
Exactly. It's not because the person was special or not special. What I want to do, right, I've said something there. I don't believe the body was found in this cave in the first place. But what I've got to do, so you're not all completely confused, I've got to go with the narrative that it was. But there's too much stuff here, and the body is really important. We've got so much nice stuff here. So ignore what I've just said there. Keep that at the back of your mind and use it again. Was he buried here or wasn't he? For this exercise today, he was buried here, because otherwise everything's going to get too confusing. What we're going to do, Dorothy, we're going to go to the discovery of this body now, yeah?
Right.
Should we do that? So, let's do it. Dorothy, I haven't got away with it, just because you moved over there.
Mind that the artistic license, that is just an illustration.
There it is, Goat Hole Cave, Paviland Cave, right?
Right.
Lots of other cave networks around. What you've got here, you've got Parc La Breas, and what you've got, Tooth Hole Cave, you've got Cat Hole Cave, lots of really early prehistoric stuff. There's about 20 to 30 prehistoric caves within this landscape, right? And Goat Hole is one of them. So if we want to go back again, what I need to do is actually tell you about the discovery of this. There are the bones. These are the bits covered in red ochre. Weirdly enough, we've only got, if we look at this, okay, we've only got that side of the body intact. We've got a bit of that, right? However, Reverend Buckland, when he excavated it, shows an illustration that this body was found intact. What the hell happened to the skull? And there's something that what may have happened to the skull. This is quite simple. Reverend Buckland describes the bones as being stained, right? It's not a joke about the skulls in the office, it's a fact. Mammoth skull is on his desk one day, and the next day when he come back, he writes that it must have fallen off, it's lost. Anyway, so you can imagine the bones go back to Oxford, all of them. All of the bones go back to Oxford, right? And they're arranged on the desk. Years later, something happens to Reverend Buckland, they're put away in a drawer and all the rest of them. So he said, right, everything's stained red, right? And they've got a skull that isn't stained red, and they get rid of it. It's because the skull was never stained red in the first place. And this is the problem with this time in history. When people are digging these things up, wherever they're found, there's a great problem with getting things right. Okay, here we go. So we know about male-female thing, we know about the ochre, we know about all that, that's great. We know about the stone. You've got so many facts there, right, which is great. You can make up your own minds. This is why this is going this way. But what we need to do, I need to express the discovery, okay? And in fact, I'm going to chuck it out there. The discovery of this body is the same as the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. Right, when I was on Tuesday, right, I hadn't read one article I had on my computer. I hadn't read it, right? And as I was doing the talk on Tuesday, somebody said, hang on a minute, right? What you're saying is that in 1822, in December 1822, somebody had wrote a letter to a geological professor in London, of Reverend William Buckland, who managed to get a team of people together from all the way from London on the 18th of January, right? Dig in the cave for a whole week, go home with all the artefacts, and that is the story of the Lady of Paviland Cave. And then the person said, actually, that can't be the case, because there's no way you can get all this information and understand all this stuff within one single week. And I actually said, actually, you're probably right. If I'd have only bloody read my notes, the body was probably discovered at the beginning of January 1822 by people who were not Reverend Buckland.
It's like time tea.
It's like time tea.
Would the head been there? Sorry.
It would have been there, yes, because he
But
draws
they-
it in a
they
little
would-
sketch.
yeah,
He
but-
shows it in a sketch.
Oh, sorry.
The
I
skull
thought
shows.
they might have taken it with them like people did in them days.
I,
You know.
because it's not stained in ochre, they didn't think it's part of the body, even though Reverend Buckland showed
Right.
it was.
Right.
That's the point. Right, what's happened, right? It says here, listen to this. Here we go.
Shall I shut the door? Because I did that, so I don't know. Thank you. It's gone cold.
Right, here we go. In 1822, on the 22nd of December, a Daniel Davis, a Reverend John Davis, goes into the cave at Paviland with Lady Talbot of Penrhys Castle. And by the 27th of December, They write a letter to Reverend Buckland. The letter's got to go all the way to London, by the way, Oxford, and it's December, so it probably wouldn't have got there until about the 2nd or 3rd of January. The Reverend Buckland gets this letter. He gets a full team of people together in 2 weeks, managed to get all the way from London to South Wales, do an excavation for a whole week, bring all the stuff to Oxford. The whole story doesn't pan out. And in fact, what happened was that earlier on in 1822, Daniel Davis and Reverend Davis went into the cave at Paviland, found a load of bones and skulls and different bits, a tusk of a mammoth, right? Then Lady Talbot of Penrice Castle, she comes in and she says, oh wow, we've got all these things. And eventually they sit down and they say, oh, this stuff's really important. Oh, by the way, we may have lost 1 or 2 ribs, don't worry about it. On their red. Oh Christ, I don't know where that one went. And then basically, and then by the 22nd of December, the Reverend Buckland already knows about this. He already knows. It's like, because he's had to get the team together, right? The logistics of getting a group of people from London to Wales, right? Even today isn't an easy thing. You've got to get tools and equipment and all the rest of it. You've got to get the know-how, you've got to know the tides, and you've got to get accommodation and all the rest of it. You just can't turn up with 20 people in 1822 in South Wales and expect everything's going to be glorified. There's no travel lodge. You're not going to be able to go down to the little store on the corner and buy all the tools you bloody want. There's no juicings and all the rest of it. And then I'm starting to think this is a bit like the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. Howard Carter knew about Tutankhamun's tomb. He knew about it probably a decade earlier. The robber's hole that's dug in there is dug by Howard Carter a decade earlier. He knows it's there. And then you start to think, actually, there's a lot more to this discovery than meets the eye. Bill, I thought you were going to say something, Bill.
No, you've answered some of my questions actually, because I'd always assumed that the skeleton was a result of excavation. It had been placed in the cave, and then the bones painted ochre. But it wouldn't have lasted 1,000 years, let alone 29,000 years, that staining. So you've explained now how the staining actually got through.
Yeah, the one thing, as you know about excavation, is that there's 2 facts here. The one fact, when you lay a body out and it's exposed, birds come in here and nick bits of the bones, right? And you're never going to get them back. The smaller bones go first. So then when you collect all the bones together, you're not going to get those rib bones for a start. You're not going to get the pelvic bones. You're not going to be able to put together the humerus and then the radius and the ulna. And the other point as well is, this is a good point. This is even up until the 1800s. People didn't know how the human body worked. So it's likely that if they had collected the bones together, Bill, right, they wouldn't have been able to put it together properly. That's another fact. Another fact as well, bones would have been missing. And the other fact, there'd be bite marks on there, there'd be abrasion marks. And Bill, you're dead right in the assumption. There's no way possibly that this body was ever exposed to any elements. It's been placed into the cave. That's a fact. And it was never covered up. Now, the sense of the human body, I don't know if this is appropriate, but I'm going to try and put it in a better way. As the body decays, the colour's going to go, okay? You add ochre to it, and that goes into the flesh and all the rest of it, right? And there's going to be movement. There's actually, because of a body decaying, you've all heard about, when you pass on, your hair's still growing and all the rest of it, and whatever theories you've got, because your skin's receding and all the rest of it, right? And there's gases in your body and the body moves and all the rest of it. The effect of the ochre would have exactly the same thing. It would really have that. And it's that really close-knit thing that you're visiting the body and you're keeping the body alive by knowing it's there. Okay? They're not deliberately living in the mouth of the cave for 10 bloody years because they want to keep the body safe, right? They're living in the mouth of the cave because that's where they're bloody living. And actually, they're living in the mouth of the cave. They've got this person in the back of the cave and they're linked to it. There's that connection. The mentality of people in prehistory was this, right? It's quite an easy mentality, right? Let's be really crass. Somebody dies, You don't have time for mourning them, right? You strip them off, you put them on a platform, and birds peck at them, right? As you're working in the field, right, you can see that that person that you love, who's passed on, is decaying. Birds are there, and you're thinking, that's okay. So one day, you go over there, in a few months' time, you pick up all the big bones, right? You put them in a pit, causeway enclosure site, another lecture, right? And you're going to get the skull, right? Let's just do this as crude as possible. You're going to get the skull, and you're going to have a post sticking up, you're going to poleaxe the thing, right? And then, every now and again, you're going to say, oh, hiya, Eric, right? And you're going to touch the skull, you're going to go off with your work. This is how people used to mourn, right? This was their period of mourning. In modern day society, don't any of you take this the wrong way, and there's nothing wrong in it, but we've got the luxury to mourn, right? We can take a year off, we can mourn for the rest of our lives, and the state will look after us, right? Nothing derogatory there. Please don't take that the wrong way. There's nothing wrong with that. Some people can't deal with it. There's certain things about members of my family passing. I can't deal with it either.
Yeah,
But I've got different ways
then.
of dealing with it.
That's then.
That's
Yeah,
then,
well,
exactly. That's then. Exactly, you can't make a comparison. Exactly, you can't. It's two different worlds. Thank you for making me see sense,
That's
Dorothy.
then.
That's then. You want to say something, Glenda, but you're going to have to do it on the wave of this.
Yeah. All it was, when you were saying that, my brain was thinking, oh, that's why it wasn't pecked to pieces, because he was in the back of the cave, and they were living in the front, so no animals went past
They couldn't pass
Yeah,
them.
that's
Exactly.
all it was.
And there's no domestication of dogs or
Yeah.
anything. There's not then.
So it's protected it, yeah.
It's actually, you know what I'm going to do? Use Dorothy's words, that was there. They're not deliberately protecting it.
No.
It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
It's the way it is. It's the way it is. There's nothing else.
But as George said, why is there only one there unless they picked it up and put it there?
Perhaps
George.
he was the only one that died at the time.
But it's the only
If
one that
they-
survived because the rest of the cave has been eroded out into insignificance. There are other reports of bones being found there, but they're not in a good state. Okay, there's other pits in there, right? But whatever was in this cave, other than this body, has been completely lost. Now, I haven't done this bit here, and I'm going to do it before we have a break. I'm going to try and do this bit in front of me. Get this. But unfortunately, the biggest problem with Reverend Buckland's excavations, right? We're presuming 90% of the body was actually found here. I've got a 10% doubt, which is fine. Okay, that's okay. I'm glad I've got a 10% doubt, right? Because if I didn't spout on about the fact that we've got our human origins from somewhere else on the planet, I would be ripping this article apart. This can't be real. I've got a 10% doubt. It's the actor in me. When we're acting on stage on TV, right, you've got to make sure that your glass, there's that little bit. So if you're on the outside and you're acting as a serious person, you've got to just make sure that serious person isn't totally serious. And inside, you've got to feel something else, right? You've got to have that little bit to sort of move around, right? That's why I'm saying there's a 10% doubt in me. But the 90% of me tells me that the body was buried here. But I can't prove yay or nay that. Because when Reverend Buckland excavated there, all the stuff that he didn't think was relevant was chucked in the sea. He was able to toss it in the sea. Let's just use those crude words, just toss it in the sea. And we know that above is an Iron Age hill fort. Reverend Buckland didn't find anything in his cave from the Iron Age because it wasn't relevant to him. He just tossed it in the sea, right? Just got rid of it. There's none of that there. So we know that all that was discarded. This guy was excavated on the 18th of January for 1 week. They went through a few layers of material, right? How many layers, we don't really know. Maybe it was a foot of deposits or whatever it was. Don't quote me on that. The work was so rapid, and would the Reverend Buckland have done any of the work himself? Would he? Likely. He wouldn't have done any of the work himself. He's the supposed expert, right? He's got people in there who don't even know what this thing is, and they're going to think, oh, toss that, it's not really important. I've run many archaeological excavations, and you've got to keep your eye upon absolutely everything, right? And that's people who are supervised directly with fairly modern techniques. Back in the day, people weren't really bothered. Reverend Buckland. Anyway, I've just said something. That they're finding human remains in the cave, right? How did they know they were there in the first place? Right, let's just move on.
You say, sorry, about him getting things together, but he'd have to have funding.
Yes.
He'd have to have money.
It couldn't have been done like that.
No,
And
no.
you must have a clue to suggest there was something in there. If the cave was half full of debris and sand,
He gets all the credit, yeah. Now you're
what was the
talking.
clue?
Now you're talking.
Did he find a little bit of bone outside or something?
Now you are talking.
Yeah.
Now you're talking. A lot more was known by the Davises and Talbots. A lot more was known by Reverend Buckland. Reverend Buckland didn't go in there and say, I found a set of human remains. He knew a set of human remains was in there. I've told you the best archaeologists know all these things before you even know anything, right? The stuff on Orkney, people knew that 20 years about all that early stuff on Orkney. It's only now that people have started to sort of be told. I think what we'll do there, because it would be nice for George to hear this bit. So if we take a break now, that would be really good.
Have a break, have a Kit Kat.
That'd be really good. Let's have a break. And yeah, put those lights on. That'd be really good.
Please.
So here we go. This is from Reverend Buckland's own publication, Reliquae Deluvani, which means evidence of the flood. William Reverend Buckland states this in his own book. I found the skeleton enveloped by a coating of a kind of ruddle, which is ochre, red ochre, which stained the earth, and in some parts extended itself to the distance of about half an inch, 12 millimetres, around the surface of the bones. Close to that part of the thigh bone, where the pocket is usually worn, surrounded also by ruddle, about 2 handfuls of periwinkle shells were found. So in other words, they weren't necklaces. Whatever reason they were perforated for was another reason. At another part of the skeleton, contact with the ribs, 40 or 50 fragments of ivory rods. Some small fragments were found. Now these ivory rods were found by the ribs, not above the head, as shown in every other illustration since. Also some ivory rings and some other artefacts. Both rods and rings, as well as the shells, were stained superficially with red and lay in the same red substance that enveloped the bones. Another piece of evidence to say that if an animal had interfered with the body, all these bits and pieces would be spread everywhere, and they are not. Reverend Buckland was not an evolutionist, he was a creationist, and he believed that the body itself can't be more than around 2,000 years old. Apparently the earth was formed no less than 4,500 years ago, according to the teachings that Reverend Buckland understood in 1823. He not only misjudged the age of the body, but the gender. Reverend Buckland kept changing his mind to what the body was about. Originally, he said that it was the body of a customs official that had been found by local smugglers, taken into the cave and murdered, and then was covered by red ochre. Then he changed his mind and said that it must be a Roman prostitute because an Iron Age hill fort is found above. But then again, it's not to be seen as a Roman prostitute. Buckland believed the skeleton was female, largely because it was discovered with decorative items. And what do archaeologists make the mistake of doing these days? Just because they find a sword with a body doesn't mean to say it's a man. And these mistakes were being done hundreds of years ago. These perforated seashell necklaces and jewellery thought to be of elephant ivory, but now known to be carved from the tusk of a mammoth. Mammoth is a form of elephant. Anyway, these decorative items combined with the skeleton's red dye caused Buckland to mistakenly speculate that the female belonged to a witch. And then he stated that it belonged to a Roman prostitute. You would have been fine, Anne. He'd been right about you.
She's got the right words, though, hasn't she?
Yeah, exactly.
A red lady.
Finding. So here we go. What we're going to do after this little bit of text here, we're gonna go. We're going to look at a load of images if I can find my little thingy-majig.
That's a big thigh, but
I
that's
know
a
you
big
can make
hip
a show
bone,
out of
isn't it?
that, couldn't
You
Show
could. Shut up, Anne. No, I didn't tell you to shut up, Dorothy. By the time a second archaeological excavation was undertaken to Paviland Cave in 1912, it was recognised through comparison with other discoveries that had been made in Europe that this dated to the Paleolithic period, but they had no idea what time in the Paleolithic period. It was only carbon dated in the 1960s to 18,460 years ago. Now we know it's around 35,000 years old. Those, we know it's an old set of human remains. We don't really know how old it is. When the body was actually buried in the cave, we think the temperature outside may have been about 10 degrees high in the summer at max, and minus 20 degrees in the winter. However, in the summer months, the landscape would have been exceedingly rich. We know from the bone protein and bone analysis that the diet of the individual contained between 15 and 20% fish, but he lived quite some distance away from the sea. The problem with this is some bits of the human remains have actually been found. Start again. Some bits of the human remains are displayed in Oxford, in Cardiff, other artefacts displayed in Swansea. The biggest problem is looking at the evidence. As a member of the public or an archaeologist, you need to have all the information in front of you, laid out as it was believed to have been found, without any display boards, give you the little facts I've given you, and then you should be able to make up your own mind. Not by the archaeologist saying, this is what it is. They found 4,000 flints, teeth and bones. Because all these other things were found there, they started to say it's a site of a ritualistic cave and all the rest of it. But between 30,000 years ago and the period of time that we have now, people have been in the cave over generations. You know, it doesn't mean to say it's a ritualistic cave. By looking at the information at Paviland, it's very much linked to another site on the Gower Peninsula known as Longhole Cave, which has been excavated as well. And at Longhole Cave, we know from pollen and lithic analysis what the environment was like, because it dates similarly to the findings at Paviland. So what we're going to do now, we're going to look at some illustrations. And I've got to get rid of this lead because I've just looked at it and one or two bits of the teeth have broken off. That's why it's not working. So now look at this little plan here. And if I can get my glasses on, I can show you what it is. Right, this little plan here. Now, this is the plan that Reverend Buckland made of the excavations. Now you're looking down on it, right? There's a couple of pits in there that may have contained human bones, but from a different period. But so that's sort of the mouth of the cave there, and if you look there, there's the body. So if we look sort of lengthways, and there you go. You're looking down on it now, but you can clearly see a mammoth skull and the rest of the body. Where the hell is the rest of the body? This is why it's a good idea to keep all the human remains and everything together with the body, because now we're left with basically under half of it, which we're not really able to understand. If you can imagine, that's a mammoth skull. So obviously it's about this big. It disappeared on his desk.
Somebody might have thought he was eaten by a mammoth.
Mammoths were vegetarians, you nog.
Have they sketched two legs there? I can see.
There are two legs. There's one there and another leg there. Yeah. So actually,
He just seemed to got a gap between his pelvis and his rib.
hang on a minute. I haven't actually examined this closely. We've actually got one length of arm. So actually this is really interesting. Because oh God, I've just realised something. You are dead right, Dorothy. We've got, if we match that up, hang on, Dorothy, you've just made a really important point. If we go to actually what we find, Can somebody do a little scribble? Let's right. Okay, where is it? There's a. Oh, here we go. Right, this is what it is. If we look there, okay, one of you scribble down that we've got the entire of the left side here, bits of the right side. We've got the pelvic bone here, so we've got this side, we've got all this side, and we've got most of the arm, right? So, I've got to take a note. I've got to scribble.
Bill's taking notes.
Bill, right? Okay.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do, I'm going to go a bit of paper in there. Hang on.
We can't see. because
Hang on,
it's
shh!
dark.
And stop moaning.
But the
You're
light.
right, it's too, I can't write anymore.
All right, then.
Too
Hang
dark.
on, put the light on.
Just
Hang
one.
on, hang on, there's an infant.
Just one.
Oh, sorry. we've got-
That's better.
Yeah, we can still see the
Right, all
screen.
right, right. So if we do this hand side, right? So we got that there, sort of there, and we got the arm, right? So if we go to
Yeah,
as that's
what we
lying,
got.
hang on, as that's lying.
That's what we got now. That sketch was from the original drawing.
Yeah, that's from the original drawing. So we're going to see what was there originally then and what's actually gone missing since.
Yeah.
So if we go down, I haven't actually looked at closely at
He
this.
did have an arm, but it's bent. He's leaning on it, like going like that.
Right, so there we go,
Yeah,
right?
he's leaning on. He's got a
So,
leg
so
missing.
that bit is actually, there's something missing there on the plan, right? The rest of this bone is actually intact. The rest of the rib bone is clearly showing that you've got a bit of an arm missing there. But mind you, it's showing that down to about there, that's missing as well.
Oh.
So the high likelihood is that this whole top part here, all this went missing. All of it went missing. You got that? Agreed, Bill?
Yeah.
Is that the only sketch he made?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perhaps he just did it quick.
Put ditto for the ribs.
A few paints in it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the other thing as well is this is all being dug up by people who've never done archaeology before. And this guy, Reverend Buckner, said, "Oh, that's brilliant. We found these remains." And
Yeah, but
then
remember he did it in
we'll
a
sketch
week,
it.
so he just most certainly left the leg out.
that is a really whoever mentioned that. That's a really good thing. Anyway, moving on.
He
So
probably said we
You
filled
only
in when we
said-
get back
So
on
what
there.
we've got, if you want to actually go to the cave, this is with the sea here, and you've got the valley there, and you've got that cave. There's another little bit of the cave here, but this doesn't go any further.
Right.
It's likely there was 2 cave systems into here,
Did you go down?
and it's very likely.
Is it near Amroth?
No, no,
No,
no.
it's the
No,
girl.
no,
The
no, no.
girl.
It's all the way further down.
It's not far from Rosalie. No,
Didn't you go down
Rosalie.
there to try and
I've
find
not been
it?
Yeah, we gave up.
Yeah. That's all right then.
But anyway, you can only get to that cave at really low tide, right? And you go down this glacial valley. But back in the day, there was a lot more rock here and a lot more rock here. So it was a bit of a nice secluded area. And this was another cave system. There's very little left of it today. So here we go. There's Reverend Buckland himself with his top hat. I can't imagine he would have done any work.
But they
And
used to dress up, didn't they? They'd go and visit digs, wouldn't they? The Victorians
Oh.
and that.
there's Reverend Buckland again, right? There's with the saber-toothed tiger skull. I've no idea where that went. You can imagine he's got all these things on his desk and suddenly they disappear.
He sold them.
It is an odd story, and it's one that he tells. He tells the story that the next day it's gone. He thinks it's fallen under his desk. That's his
I
exact
know what
words.
it was, NASA.
Was it Waterman Wheeler that started you printing where you find things? I know he did the grid, but like I could never be archaeology. You know, I find a flint and I got to take a photograph of it, and you've got to write down where you found it.
Exactly.
You know, it's got
Well,
to be.
no, actually, Sir Mortimer Wheeler, a guy by the name of Flinders Petrie in the late 1800s, he's really starting to make plans and stuff, and then Sir Mortimer Wheeler takes it a bit further. People have always tried to make recordings of where things are found, but this is when trying to get things accurate could have meant so much of a difference to this body, and this accuracy did not actually come down to actual paper. That's what you see today. And the very strange thing is that's basically where the body would have been, and you can actually see that Everything's been taken out of there. You can't go back there and see if he was right or wrong now. And that's the big problem. And the one thing that springs to my mind, right, you know, on that 10% doubt, if the water level's a little bit higher today, a big storm, wouldn't take much for water to have washed all the deposits out of there in the 1800s, meaning that they may not have found it there in the first place. That's where the 10% comes from. I have to give you that little bit, okay?
Or the pirates could have put it in there.
Is it Jack Sparrow?
It's true, the pirates could have put it in there.
It couldn't have been a custom officer because they would never have
We
spent...
know him.
No, but he couldn't have spent time painting him red while they were waiting for the police to come and catch him like that. Stupid. Nobody else said that.
This lecture's deteriorated, it's going so well until then. Right, these rods were actually found on his chest. The problem is with these rods being found, right, if you go to the displays where it talks about the Lady of Paviland Cave, first of all, you go there and you think, wow, Lady of Paviland Cave, and on the board it actually says it's a bloke. Now, come on, they knew it wasn't a lady in the 1920s, right? And this is the problem. When something's set in archaeology, you can't get archaeologists' minds off them. And the people say, oh, these ivory rods indicate that the person was a shaman. Does it? No, it doesn't.
What?
A shaman, a magic man,
Oh, I see.
A witch doctor.
a witch doctor, a quack.
He didn't do much work with 4 rods, did he?
No.
No.
What was it?
Yeah, but they would have
So-
been washed away though, wouldn't they?
We do know what they were there
I get
for.
really confused with this.
Right, if you can imagine, this is the problem. This
Yeah.
is the big problem. Anything near the sea, right? And yeah, this is just forget about that 10%. Go with it being found there now. Just go for it. I'm glad you're all completely confused at getting to the end of this today. So you can imagine, right? A storm in the 1800s, one big storm, everything would have been washed out. So this is the point I've been making. This is the point. However, they were able to go back then in the 1920s and find a few more things. So that's how they portray it. So we know that that's not the case. It just doesn't fit the bill.
What are those circles for there?
Oh, those little circles there, those are the
Arm things.
yeah, bangles. Bangles. They found these wonderful carved ivory bangles. So basically, you've got a mammoth tusk. You sort of, because it's going to be quite soft in there, so that would make sense.
It's like if they raided a load of caves and shoved them all into one.
Thinking that they were all found there. Oh, that's terrible you saying that. This is what the coastline looked like back in the day. So you've got Paviland there. It's much more than 80 miles away. But if you think the person would have had to have gone back and forth to the person was nomadic initially, and then the family turned out to live in that area, and obviously they kept an eye on the body, which is key to all this.
What map is that? That looks like Portugal and Italy.
It is.
Yes, it's Europe.
It's Europe, yeah.
Showing
It's
the...
Great Britain.
There's Great Britain.
The thick coastline.
Oh, I see.
Doesn't show anything
I
about the
see.
bank, Carl, why not?
I see. It was all like joined up together.
Yeah, it was all
Yeah,
joined
I
up
can
together,
see
that's
it
why.
now.
And actually, this is wrong because the coastline would be much further out in that case. Moving on.
I can see the pig now.
So we've seen that one. Obviously seen this lots of times. Now this, a little bit about this. Back in the day, this is the rock. What's happened to the rock is because of movements in the earth crust. It's from going horizontal like that. It's moved to the diagonal, so it's created all these pillows. And when the body was laid in the cave, obviously the cave would have been a lot further out here, and there'd been more rock here and more rock here. It'd been secluded in its own little valley. But obviously, everything's very much changed over these thousands and thousands of years. And that was the one I was saying earlier on. That's the one that's all that's left of the
Looks
cave
like an
system.
owl.
And this is what it looks like today.
Doesn't
It looks
like
a lot
an owl's
nearer than
face.
that one.
It's not a great cave because there's a lady there.
Oh.
No, she's not one of mine. So the only way to actually get there when the tide is in is to actually go down a hole in the roof, and then you've got to wait for a really low tide to go in there.
Are you
And-
playing a game, Anne?
She's playing with herself.
Like, can you click, click, click?
Leave
Concentrate.
your maracas alone.
Put your maracas in your pocket.
So this is actually looking a side view. You can imagine the body being found there, and there's these holes here, and this is another clue. This is all collapsed. The whole network has collapsed, and that there is what we're seeing. So if we can go on a little bit further.
It's 20.
There we go. That's what survived.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Careful.
One-legged.
And from Reverend Buckland's own description, what was there at one time was at least all of this. And what happened to it, we do not know. And to be honest with you, it was probably all there, but they missed it. So these are the periwinkle shells. They didn't find any cowrie shells there. That's a periwinkle. They
Yeah.
found a fair few of them in there, which were perforated.
You periwinkle shells have a habit of these little worms can bite their way through.
By their way through what?
The
The
shell.
shell.
With the holes in them.
Oh,
Yeah.
obviously, yeah.
Ah,
Yeah,
right.
You can find them, that these little creatures have bitten their way through. You'll find them on the beach like it and
Can you?
everything.
So they may have been naturally occurring like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What's occurring?
Occurring. What's occurring exactly from Barry?
She's on tonight too.
Oh, who?
Stella.
I had a row with her once. So this is what not many of these periwinkle shells have survived. So this is just one of them, and there's nothing much to see. But they obviously got holes in them all, as you say. They could have been naturally occurring holes. And this again, we've seen lots of copies, but that's again from his own book. And
Don't you start, buddy.
Oh, sorry, I'm just...
and actually, to be honest with you, that's the last slide. So
Pardon me.
what I'm going to say, so we now know that lots of what we did feel about the Lady of Paviland Cave has completely changed. I want you to have an open mind when you look at the body at Paviland Cave. Are there any questions?
Yes.
Go. Where's Anne gone? Not with George.
Would I be
No,
right
she's out there.
in thinking that when it comes to radiodating the bones, they used bone marrow, that being the only source of uncontaminated DNA?
But obviously the bone marrow was no longer there at that point.
So what did they use? What samples did they use on the bone?
I think the only way to have really examined it without the contamination from Reverend Buckland's own hands and the excavators is to get a piece of the bone that is almost sealed, and you're going to have to cut a sample through that to actually try and glean
Sorry.
some sense of the DNA. Other than that, it's not going to be possible.
The other question is,
Go for it.
did Reverend Buckland ever say anything about finding these red stains in other parts of the cave?
No,
He didn't, just
no,
that.
nothing at all. Nothing.
And the third
It was,
question,
yeah.
all the bones are in Oxford now?
No, they're spread around the place.
Are they?
Some in Oxford, some in Cardiff, and some other stuff in Swansea. So it really makes things ridiculous. So you can't. The only way for anybody to make up their own mind with what's going on is if you've got it all in one spot.
So why are they separate like that? Doesn't make sense.
Well, if I can mention one of the news headlines that I've got on this computer,
About my truth ones.
the Welsh Assembly wants the bones back in Wales, right?
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, it's only when Wales is actually recognised as a country can one country give the bones to another country. As it stands, Wales is still politically part of England, so Oxford has got no jurisdiction to needing to give it back to a separate country, because we're not. All they're doing is going to be giving the bones back to another place, and there's nothing in law forcing them to do that. If Wales was a proper
Good
country,
night, everyone.
they could do that.
George.
Well, bye now.
So
Bye,
why
George.
didn't back up the bones and Swansea and
Yeah,
Cardiff come
you're
together?
lovely, George.
They should do. It should all be in one spot.
Yeah.
Hang on, just say goodbye to George. We'll answer your question.
Yeah.
Oh, George,
You're
is it like?
You know, guaranteed this wouldn't work. If I sent someone a text, it wouldn't work.
Oh.
It wouldn't have worked. today.
It must be the church.
What?
I don't know.
I must have my mobile network on, so it's charging.
Yeah, that's what you haven't got on when it's not working.
He
I
cannot
told you
look
that before.
I don't know.
Really interesting.
I just find this
What's in
weather
this
so
tin, or is
boring.
anybody taking
It's just so
home?
boring, isn't it? I mean,
Drop
you
it.
have all the time.
I'll take one, because I'm trying.
Right,
I'll take it on my walk on Sunday.
are you?
Did you bring
We have to
them?
now.
Costo.
Can I put these in the tin, or do you want them taken home?
No, it's me that bought them.
Oh, somebody just pointed across the
Oh,
floor.
no, you can, yeah, keep them in there.
I didn't buy anything.
These tasted horrible.
Right, you
Go
need, you need to listen to me.
Oh, really?
I tell you certain things, right?
Oh, mate.
That is why I've had my phone out.
Ooh.
Right, somebody
Go on.
says here an ocean rubbery, she's called. She says, why do you see empty periwinkle, mussel and clamshells with holes in them? And the science centre, because she's gone to a science centre to ask them, explains how some snails dwell a hole in other shells and suck the food out of the other one. So another periwinkle or whelk will go up to it, and their thing is to drill a hole in its prey. Then it uses its proboscis
Yeah.
to suck out the content out, and that is why you've got
Oh.
holes in I knew it.
So it could be a naturally occurring phenomenon.
Yeah.
Exactly, that's
Yeah.
a good one. Not necessarily, and they've just been collected together, not for jewellery, just because they were special. Exactly. Any other questions?
What did you say about Long Hole Cave?
There's another place called Long Hole Cave, which they've got wonderful Paleolithic evidence in there.
Is that Park Bleos?
Pardon?
Is that Park Bleos area?
I don't think Long Hole Cave is in Park Labrelle. Cat Hole Cave and Tooth Hole Cave is
Those are
in.
the ones.
Yeah.
Cattle Cave, yeah.
But that's not. It's somewhere else on the Gower. I've been asked that by a
Animals
couple
and
of
bits.
people. I will look it up for you next week.
Don't
Long
know the
Hole
archaeology,
Cave.
but
I've got a book with all your holes and your caves. I had brought it when it was downstairs.
Yes, you
We
did.
did go hole and
I will let you know next week, Pat.
Okay.
Any other questions, folks? Have you all enjoyed that today?
Yes.
I am knackered. Right, so I'll just mention any money for any monies whenever, and I'll need to know about the trips and stuff for next week. If you can please let me know. Other than that, if there's no more questions, thank you very much for coming today, and I will see you all next week.
what you doing next week? Do we need to bring
Let's have a clap.
You did tell me. You did tell us.
It's Lou Bianca Woman, but
Lou
we're
Bianca
also
Woman.
what we're also doing. I'm gonna get to the back of this new discovery,
Oh,
and
yeah.
this for me is massively important.
What is
Don't
it?
read too much, Pat, because I'll need it for next week.
where's your dish?
Oh, I will give them to you now, darling.
All right.
I'll give them to you now. Give me a second.
I can throw it
Get
off.
my head together.
Another one.
Right, if there's no more questions, thank you very much. And put them in the kitchen. Thank you. What's wrong with them? Do you want to give it? I'll give it a quick swirl.
Yeah, I'll wash it
We
at
put
home.
it in the soapy water now when we wash
Yeah, I'll wash it at home.
Right, anyway, here's the box.
And the lid.
Oh, you go on the lid, do you?
Yes, I do.
We got loads. We got
again.
loads of lids, and we got loads of bloody bowls, and these things, and none of them match. What a pain in
I
the
know.
backside.
I've got them in containers. Right, I'll tell you where they came from. It's like a fridge, those big things.
Yeah.
When you've had a new fridge, I kept them, put them in the cupboard under the
Yeah.
stairs. Tupperware, not Tupperware, but
Yeah.
plastic. The bowl's in there, the lid's in the other.
No.
I take them out.
No, I can't do that. They
Yeah,
got you-
but take
'cause
them
it-
out. How
yeah.
many times have I got the lid for?
Yeah, exactly. Why? It's like socks.
know,
One
yeah.
colour sock in the bloody. Yeah, what you need to do is keep the lids on them. Don't separate them.
Yeah, but I've got too many. They take up too much room.
Well, I tell you what,
'Cause
if
they
you don't
go
bloody
inside
want, if you
each
don't
other.
want them, I'll have them for bloody artefacts and stuff. There you go, darling, on your marks, get set, go. There you go.
Thank
good.
you.
Right, thank you, folks. Good. Dorothy, you're a woman of wisdom. You're a woman of Belanger. You're a woman with it all.
Do you want my brick?
Oh, I
with the
love
holes
that
in?
because I tell you
And there's
what.
Welsh cakes in there as well.
I hope not in under the brick.
What's
I
it?
hope not under the brick.
You stepped this way.
Oh, that's good. Good, thank you very much. Thank you. You found the brick where?
I was walking walking the dog.
Walking the dog.
Thank you, Dot.
On the road to Asda.
Are you just going to go home now, or do you want to live with me?
No, you're going to drop a book off.
You got to drop the book off. You know what you do? Send Dorothy to the door to put it through.
I am going that way.
I'm finished.
Oh, you just dripped that all over your trousers.
You know,
Is it?
it's time you got a bloke to make you happy. What you need is to get rid of Joe, right, and find a nice young man like Bill with it all.
Ooh, Bill.
Bill, you couldn't handle Anne, could you?
In what respect, Carl? Be specific.
You know, everything. She's a woman who pours bloody tea into a cup of soup.
She's a source of endless interest, is that?
And she'd take you to the train clubs to drop you off.
Would she now?
And she'd take you to your bowling club.
Yes.
Yeah. And explain lots of things I never knew.
Like washing
Yes.
machines.
Couldn't understand.
Yeah, exactly. I'll tell you what, Anne makes womankind look.
Be careful.
Yeah, she's lovely.
Yeah. She said to me, she
All
said,
your
I get
ladies
ever
are lovely.
support, you know, when I
Except
come
one
out
from
here.
Barry.
She what?
Except one from Barry.
Oh yeah, but she said to me, I get ever so bored. It's lovely coming here because she meets people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
she is nice. Alright, I better go. God, isn't it cold?
It is.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me.
You look like a girl with your hair like that.
I know, dude, that's why I do it.
I wish I had some.
Hi, Bill. Coming back to my
Oh, don't, because that's. Have you seen that bloke that goes into Porthcawl ever? That he comes from Broadlands or Keffinglass Estate or something,
Yeah.
and he gets on the bus and he dresses as a woman, but you can see he's a man, and if you look at him, he goes like that. He's
What does he do?
weird. He's really weird.
He does what?
He dresses like a woman, but he dresses really strange. He's got thick makeup on. And he's not like the normal transvestites or anything. He's always on his own, but he looks vicious. Have you ever seen him? No.
He looks vicious. And what, you've looked at him, have you?
Yeah, he sort of goes at a bus stop. We sometimes park at the top of Broadlands if we want to get the bus into Swansea, right? And now and again he's at that bus stop. But sometimes he's been in Porthcawl. We go in the car to Porthcawl, and he's sitting there having a coffee, and he walks past. And if you look at him, he goes like that. He's freaky. I wonder
Very
if
strange.
Dorothy most likely has seen him.
Oh, Dorothy had run a mile.
Oh, it's nice to associate with normal people.